Los Angeles International Airport was buzzing with life, a mosaic of travelers hurrying to their gates, rolling luggage clattering on polished floors, and voices blending into a symphony of movement. Among the chaos, a man stood calmly in the first-class check-in line. Keanu Reeves, known to the world as a beloved Hollywood actor, was dressed in a plaid shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed boots. His attire, simple and unassuming, starkly contrasted with the opulence around him. On his back was a travel-worn backpack, hinting at countless adventures rather than luxury. Despite his global fame, Keanu appeared to blend effortlessly into the crowd, his demeanor exuding an understated grace that didn't demand attention. Those who looked closely, however, might have noticed an air of tranquility about him, as though the hustle and bustle of the airport could not penetrate his serene state. Standing a few feet behind him was Victor Harding, a successful entrepreneur in his early 40s. Victor was a sharp contrast to Keanu in every way. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his leather shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his watch, a limited edition luxury piece, glinted as he adjusted the cuff of his shirt. His posture was confident, his presence demanding acknowledgement from anyone nearby. Victor's gaze landed on Keanu, and a flicker of disdain crossed his face. He couldn't hide his disbelief at the sight of someone dressed so casually in a space Victor regarded as exclusive. With a smirk, he leaned slightly forward and remarked loudly enough for Keanu to hear, "First class, huh? These days, you never know who might show up here." Keanu turned his head slightly, his expression calm and unreadable. After a brief pause, he responded, "That's true. Life is full of surprises." Victor raised an eyebrow, expecting a more defensive or elaborate reply. Disappointed by the simplicity of Keanu's response, he smirked again and muttered under his breath, "Not exactly what I had in mind when I thought about exclusivity." Keanu remained silent, his composure unshaken. He turned his attention back to the line, moving forward as it progressed. Victor, however, couldn't let go of his curiosity or his skepticism. To him, the idea that someone like Keanu could afford the same luxury he had worked tirelessly for seemed absurd. Who does he think he is? Victor wondered, his thoughts swirling with judgment. As the check-in process continued, Victor noticed more about Keanu. The way he stood, relaxed but confident, seemed to draw attention, though not in the way Victor anticipated. While Victor exuded an air of self-importance, Keanu's presence was subtle, almost magnetic in its humility. The stark contrast between the two men only fueled Victor's curiosity. As they moved closer to the boarding gate, Victor couldn't help but cast sidelong glances at Keanu, trying to decipher the mystery of the man who didn't seem to fit the mold of a typical first-class passenger. The boarding call finally came and the first-class line began to move. Keanu, still carrying his modest backpack, stepped forward with quiet assurance. Victor followed closely behind, his steps deliberate and confident, as though to remind everyone watching that he belonged there. As they approached the aircraft, Victor found himself speculating about Keanu's story. Was he an artist struggling to make ends meet? A lucky lottery winner splurging on a rare indulgence? Whatever the case, Victor was certain that this casually dressed man was out of place. "Let's see where this goes," Victor thought, a smug smile curling his lips. Little did he know, the encounter about to unfold would challenge not only his assumptions about Keanu, but also his understanding of success, humility, and true value. Victor stepped into the first-class cabin, his polished shoes clicking softly against the plush carpet. As he scanned the seating chart on his ticket, his eyes fell upon his designated seat and the man sitting beside it. His confidence faltered for a moment. "You've got to be kidding me," Victor muttered under his breath. Keanu Reeves, the very man whose presence had unsettled him in the check-in line, was now his seatmate for the long flight. Keanu, seemingly oblivious to Victor's discomfort, gave a polite nod and said, "Looks like we'll be traveling together." Victor managed a thin smile, masking his irritation. He lowered himself into his seat with a dramatic sigh, leaning back and adjusting his jacket. While Keanu placed his travel-worn backpack carefully under the seat in front of him, Victor scrutinized his every move, silently critiquing the apparent simplicity of the man's actions. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering pre-departure drinks, Victor struck up a conversation, not out of genuine interest, but with the intent to affirm his assumptions. "So," Victor began, his tone casual but laced with condescension, "what do you do for a living?" Keanu turned to face him, his expression calm. "I work in film," he replied simply. Victor raised an eyebrow, as though trying to decode the statement. "Film, huh? Like commercials or independent projects?" Keanu offered a slight smile. "Something like that," he said, leaving the answer deliberately vague. Victor chuckled, leaning back into his seat. "I see. It's always interesting to meet people chasing their dreams. But, some spaces aren't really for everyone. Take first class, for instance. It's not just about getting here. It's about belonging here." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He appeared to consider Victor's words for a moment before responding. "I think everyone belongs where they are. Sometimes it's just a matter of perspective." The answer, delivered with an air of quiet confidence, seemed to catch Victor off guard. He frowned slightly, as though searching for a retort, but the boarding announcement distracted him. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and the familiar hum of engines filled the cabin. Victor reclined his seat slightly, feeling the weight of his exhaustion, but unwilling to let the conversation rest. After takeoff, the flight attendants began the in-flight service, offering drinks and snacks. Victor made sure to order a glass of champagne, his request delivered with a flourish that demanded attention. "A glass of your finest, please," Victor said, flashing a confident smile at the flight attendant. When it was Keanu's turn, he gave his order without hesitation. "Just water, please." Victor couldn't resist commenting. He turned to Keanu, a smirk playing on his lips. "Water? On a first-class flight? Don't tell me you're going to waste the experience like that." Keanu accepted the bottle of water with a nod of thanks to the flight attendant. Then, he turned to Victor and replied, "I'm fine with this. Sometimes simplicity is enough." Victor narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Yeah, I guess that works for people who settle for less. Not everyone is born to enjoy the best life has to offer." Keanu raised the bottle to his lips, taking a small sip. He didn't respond immediately, allowing the silence to linger. Finally, he said, "Maybe the best is different for everyone." The calmness of Keanu's tone only seemed to irritate Victor further. He let out a dry laugh, spoken like someone who doesn't know what the best feels like. Keanu didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the window, seemingly captivated by the endless expanse of clouds outside. The exchange didn't go unnoticed. Other passengers in the cabin began to take subtle glances in their direction. While Victor's tone grew sharper, Keanu remained unflappable, his demeanor disarming in its steadiness. Victor, however, mistook Keanu's calmness for weakness. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering as he delivered what he thought was the finishing blow. Life is a lot like this cabin. Some people work hard and earn their place here. Others, well, they just get lucky." Keanu turned back to Victor, his expression still serene but with a new intensity in his eyes. "Luck or hard work, we all end up in the same place when the flight lands, don't we?" The words hung in the air like a quiet challenge. Several passengers exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from surprise to approval. Victor, on the other hand, seemed caught off guard. He chuckled nervously, attempting to mask his discomfort. "That's a nice sentiment," Victor said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But in the real world, some of us are simply on a higher level." Keanu leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms thoughtfully. "I think being on a higher level isn't about what you have, but about how you treat others," he said, his voice firm but kind. Victor stiffened. For a moment, he had no response. The truth in Keanu's words seemed to cut deeper than he expected. Trying to recover, Victor forced a laugh. "First-class self-help philosophy. Maybe you should consider giving motivational talks," he said, his sarcasm now tinged with defensiveness. Keanu didn't react. Instead, he turned back to face forward, signaling the end of the conversation. As the minutes ticked by, Victor's irritation began to show. He crossed his arms, his foot tapping against the floor. He couldn't understand why Keanu's calm responses unsettled him so much. It wasn't just the words. It was the unwavering confidence behind them. The flight attendant returned to collect empty glasses, and Victor saw an opportunity to regain control of the situation. "You know what's funny?" Victor said, his voice carrying through the cabin. "People who don't have much always talk about humility and simplicity. It's like they're trying to convince themselves they don't want what they can't have." Keanu turned to face Victor fully, his gaze steady. "And sometimes," he said, "the people who talk the most about what they have are the ones who feel the emptiest inside." The cabin fell silent. Passengers who had been quietly observing now openly turned their attention to the two men. Victor's face reddened, his confident facade beginning to crack. For a moment, Victor struggled to find a response. He opened his mouth but quickly closed it, unable to form the right words. Finally, he managed to say, "Look, I'm not trying to be rude, but the world is competitive. If you don't show people what you have, they'll ignore you. That's just how things work." Keanu tilted his head slightly, as though considering the statement. "Maybe," he said, "but I think true success doesn't need to be shouted about. It speaks for itself." Victor's jaw tightened. The words clearly struck a nerve. Around them, a few passengers nodded subtly in agreement, while others exchanged approving glances. For the first time in a long while, Victor felt truly out of his depth. The flight settled into a quiet rhythm. The hum of the engines and the soft clinking of glasses in first class became the dominant sounds. Victor sat rigidly in his seat, his arms crossed, clearly still irritated by the earlier exchange. Keanu, on the other hand, seemed entirely at ease. He flipped open a book he had pulled from his backpack, its cover worn and pages dog-eared, and began to read, completely unfazed by Victor's lingering tension. Victor couldn't resist stealing glances at Keanu. The man's calmness was unnerving, even infuriating. Who does he think he is? Victor thought, his mind racing. He sits there acting all wise and philosophical, but he's probably just a nobody. As if on cue, the flight attendant returned to their section, a warm smile lighting up her face. She stopped at Keanu's seat, leaning in slightly to speak with him in a tone of quiet respect. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "the captain asked me to let you know that your connecting flight in Tokyo has been confirmed. He also sends his regards and wanted to say he's a big fan of your work." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Victor froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Reeves?" he murmured under his breath. Slowly he turned to look at Keanu, his mind struggling to process the revelation. Keanu glanced up from his book, offering the flight attendant a polite smile. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice as calm and unassuming as ever. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Several passengers, who had been quietly observing now, exchanged astonished glances. A couple sitting 2 rows behind leaned in to whisper excitedly to one another. Some even reached for their phones, though they refrained from taking photos out of respect. Victor's face flushed with embarrassment. His earlier arrogance now felt like a heavy weight pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind replayed every snide comment he had made, each one now echoing in the light of this new information. Finally, he managed to stammer, I had no idea. I mean, you didn't say who you were. Keanu turned to face him, his expression unchanged. I didn't think it was necessary, he said gently. I don't usually introduce myself with my name. Victor's cheeks burned red. He fumbled for an apology, his words tumbling over one another. I didn't mean to offend you. I didn't know who I was talking to. Keanu let out a small sigh, leaning forward slightly. His tone was firm but kind as he said, Victor, what you said doesn't change just because you now know my name. The truth about how we treat others isn't dependent on their status or who they are. It reflects who we are. The weight of Keanu's words hit Victor like a punch to the gut. He slumped back in his seat, unable to meet Keanu's gaze. Around them, the cabin was silent, the tension palpable. The flight attendant, sensing the shift in atmosphere, quietly moved to the next section. Keanu leaned back, his focus returning to his book, while Victor sat motionless, staring blankly at the seat back in front of him. As the flight continued, Victor couldn't shake the growing discomfort in his chest. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a nagging sense of shame. He replayed the conversation in his mind, each of Keanu's calm responses now taking on a deeper meaning. Who are we without all this? Keanu's voice echoed in Victor's head. The question lingered, pulling at the corners of his thoughts. For the first time, Victor began to wonder if his obsession with success and status had blinded him to what truly mattered. Victor glanced at Keanu, who was now calmly flipping through the pages of his book. The man exuded a quiet strength that Victor found both admirable and humbling. There was no need for pretense or bravado. Keanu simply was who he was, unapologetically. Victor cleared his throat, breaking the silence between them. I need to apologize, he began, his voice quieter now. Not because of who you are, but because of how I acted. I was arrogant and, honestly, a bit of a jerk. Keanu looked up, his gaze steady, but not unkind. He considered Victor's words for a moment before responding. I appreciate the apology, he said. But more than that, I hope you take something away from this. Sometimes the way we treat others says more about us than about them. Victor nodded slowly, the truth in Keanu's words sinking in. He leaned back in his seat, his mind racing with thoughts of how often he had judged others based on their appearance or perceived status. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, the cabin stirred to life. Passengers gathered their belongings, stretching and preparing for the next leg of their journeys. Keanu closed his book, tucking it back into his backpack, with the same care he had shown when placing it there earlier. Victor hesitated for a moment before speaking again. You know, he said, his voice softer now, you've given me a lot to think about. I've spent so much time trying to prove something to the world, but maybe I've been missing the point. Keanu offered him a small, encouraging smile. It's never too late to change, he said. Sometimes, the hardest battles we fight are the ones within ourselves. As the plane touched down and passengers began to disembark, Victor watched Keanu closely. Despite the attention he received from fans and onlookers, Keanu remained approachable and gracious, greeting each interaction with a genuine smile. Victor lingered at the terminal, watching as Keanu disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope that he could be better, do better. The encounter had humbled him, leaving an indelible mark on his perspective. And as he walked away, Victor knew that this flight was not just a journey from one place to another, but the start of a journey within himself. Victor sat in the quiet lounge at Narita International Airport, staring into his untouched coffee. The bustling travelers around him were a blur. His mind was far from the present. The encounter with Keanu Reeves on the flight had left him shaken in a way he hadn't expected. For years, Victor had built his identity around success, wealth, and the outward markers of achievement. But now, all of it felt hollow. The words Keanu had spoken during the flight lingered in his mind. The way we treat others says more about us than about them. He had heard similar sentiments before, platitudes shared in motivational books or posted on social media. But this time, it was different. This time, the words carried weight, delivered by someone who lived them. Keanu hadn't just said those things, he embodied them. As Victor boarded his connecting flight, he found himself reflecting on his journey to this point. He thought about the countless meetings where he had dismissed others for not meeting his standards, the relationships strained by his unrelenting drive for success, and the quiet moments he had sacrificed in pursuit of something that now felt meaningless. Sitting by the window, he watched the ground shrink away as the plane climbed into the sky. For the first time in years, Victor felt small, not in a negative way, but in a humbling, grounding sense. He realized how vast the world was, and how insignificant his perceived importance might be in the grand scheme of things. The memory of Keanu calmly flipping through his book came to him. There had been no need for pretense or status. Keanu's confidence came from within, unshaken by external judgment. Victor envied that peace, that sense of self. Upon landing at his final destination, Victor's steps were slower, his posture less rigid. He had always walked with the air of someone important. But now, he found himself observing others instead of demanding attention. At the baggage carousel, he noticed a young man struggling with a heavy suitcase. Normally, Victor might have ignored him, too absorbed in his own world to care. But this time, he stepped forward. "Need a hand?" Victor asked. The young man looked up, surprised but grateful. "Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you." Victor helped lift the suitcase onto the cart, nodding politely. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. As he walked away, he realized how simple acts of kindness could make a difference, not just for others, but for himself. Days turned into weeks, and Victor began to incorporate what he had learned into his daily life. He listened more, judged less, and sought connections rather than status. At work, he started paying attention to his employees in a way he hadn't before, acknowledging their efforts and asking about their well-being. One afternoon, a junior colleague approached him nervously. "Mr. Harding, I just wanted to thank you for the support you gave me on the last project. It really meant a lot." Victor was taken aback. "Of course," he said, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. "You're doing great work. Keep it up." For the first time, Victor found fulfillment not in his achievements, but in the positive impact he had on those around him. Months later, Victor came across an article online about Keanu Reeves. It detailed Keanu's humility, his acts of kindness, and his perspective on life. Victor couldn't help but smile as he read. He remembered how, on that flight, he had underestimated the man sitting beside him. As he closed his laptop, Victor felt a sense of gratitude. The encounter with Keanu had been more than just a chance meeting. It had been a wake-up call. He began to write an email, not to Keanu, but to his own network of colleagues, friends, and family. In it, he shared the lessons he had learned, hoping to pass on the wisdom he had gained. He ended the email with a simple message: "Life is hard enough for everyone. Let's not make it harder by putting others down. Instead, let's lift each other up, one small act of kindness at a time." As Victor hit send, he felt lighter. He knew he couldn't undo his past mistakes, but he could choose to move forward differently. And in the quiet of his office, he silently thanked the man who had taught him that the greatest success wasn't found in wealth or recognition, but in how we choose to treat the people we meet along the way. The story of Victor and Keanu is a reminder that true success isn't about what we achieve or accumulate, but about the impact we leave on others. Keanu Reeves, through his calm demeanor and thoughtful words, showed that humility and kindness are timeless virtues. And for Victor, the experience was transformative, a lesson in looking beyond appearances and embracing what truly matters. The next time you find yourself in a position to judge or dismiss someone, remember, respect and humility never go out of style. Perhaps like Victor, you'll discover that the path to becoming a better person starts with small changes in how you see and treat those around you.